Okay, so this is where we left off yesterday. We came up with the pattern. We came up with this pattern, and I had you guys write down the pattern so that you don't have to memorize it, because remember, you can use your notes on a test or a quiz. So when we do take a test next week, you don't want to have to memorize what we did, because I bet some people forgot what we did yesterday. All right. So make sure it's written somewhere in your notes, right underneath it. You got some area right here, right underneath where the notes are. How did I come up with, how did I know that I to the 21st was just I? How did I know that I to the 48th power was 1? How did I know that I to the 74th was -1? And how did I know that I to 102 is -1? Right? So we saw that the pattern went by 4s, right? Every 4 it repeated. Every 4 it repeated. So I to the first was I squared was -1, I to the third was -I to the fourth was 1, and then we repeated, right? I to the fifth is I to the sixth is -1, I to the seventh was -I to the eighth was 1, and then we repeated again, right? Every 4 we repeated. So that's great, but how does it help us with these guys over here? Well, since it repeats every 4, we can divide by 4, right? We can divide by 4. Divide the exponent by 4. And then you're either going to get a remainder or you're not going to get a remainder, right? Some numbers have a remainder when we divide by 4. So like 21 here, if I divide 4 into 21, I get a remainder, right? If I divide 4 into this number here, I get a remainder. The remainder was 1. So if I get a remainder of 1, that means my answer is going to be I, right? And if I get a remainder of 2, like I think 74 had a remainder of 2, so 4 divided by 74, that's -1. This guy right here did not have a remainder. 4 goes into 48 perfectly, evenly, no remainder. So that's why I have a 1. 102 goes in, not evenly, but it goes in with a remainder of 2. So that's why we had a -1. Okay. So make sure you have those in your notes, not just the answers, because the answers aren't going to help you. Because I'm telling you right now, I'm not going to pick one of these guys. I might pick something in between, but I'm not going to pick one of these guys. So you got to be able to do it on your own. So the rule I put on the board here: divide by 4, divide the exponent, divide the power by 4. What do you get as a remainder? Whatever you get as a remainder is going to tell you what your answer is. All right. So make sure that's written somewhere in your notes. You got a nice clean spot right there to write it in. I'm not going to force you to, but I know test day, there's going to be, how do I do this one? I'm going to be like, can't help you. Okay. So make sure you help yourself, especially if you don't remember, if you're not going to remember it. Okay. Test day probably next, earliest test day is going to be is probably next Thursday or Friday. Next Thursday or Friday. Yeah. Because we have one more thing to do in our notes. And then I'm going to give you a review, like a study guide chapter review. Okay. So we'll take a day to do that. And then what I do is I do what's called a group test. A group test is a test, but you're in a group of 4 people and you all have the same test. Okay, so you can help each other out. Okay, that's kind of a pre-test. It's kind of a pre-test. It goes in the grade book, but it's kind of a pre-test that lets you know how you're going to do. And then the next day after that is test by myself. Okay. So yeah, so earliest. So there's a couple things we want to do before that. So probably Thursday or Friday of next week, probably we'll have that test. Okay. Okay. So what if I have something like this? What if I give you something like this? I to the 9th times I to the 11th times I to the 22nd. What do I do there? Yeah, Brian. Close. It's not multiply. It's, yeah, when we do exponents, you're close. It's we add them. We add those exponents. So when I add those exponents, what do I get? 42. And then I use my trick over here. Divide by 4. Four goes into 42 10 times, and I'm left with a remainder of 2. So if I have a remainder of 2, the answer should be -1. Okay. A lot of people use their calculator to divide. Calculators don't do remainders unless you have a calculator I've never heard of. Okay. Because remainders are kind of elementary, right? It's really like, well, you guys first started doing division, you had remainders, right? And then you moved to decimals, right? So your calculator does decimals. So it's not going to tell you remainders. So you got to do by hand. Mm-hmm. It's a division problem. Yeah. What did I divide? How did I get this answer? 4 divided by 42. Yeah, isn't that the rule? Divide 4 by the power. Oh, if you can't read my handwriting, just do the division on your own. Yeah, if you can't, it's just division. Do the division on your own. Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. So next thing. So here, now we're going to do some adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. Okay. So before we start on that though, notice that they want your answer written as a complex number. It's written on the board there. Complex number has 2 parts. It has a real part. That comes first, real number. And then it has a second part. It has a complex part, or sorry, imaginary. Okay, it's written right here. It's also written right here. Okay. So, oops, sorry, forgot about the imaginary. If it's imaginary, it's got to have an I. Okay. So you got over here, you have 3 plus 5i. 3 is the real number. 5i is the imaginary part. And then over here, you have 2 plus 3i. 2 is the real number. 3i is the imaginary. So what do you think I'm going to do here? What do you think I'm going to do here with them? That's all I'm going to do. Yep, combine like terms. Now, how do I get rid of those parentheses? Because I can't combine them unless I have no parentheses, right? So what's the rule for getting rid of parentheses? Starts with a D. Not divide, distribute. Distribute, rainbows, right? So if I'm going to do rainbows, I have to distribute something over here. Well, there's nothing over here. You have to, you can't distribute 0 because then it just goes away. But what's out there that we don't write? +1. So when I distribute a 1, does anything change? No. Okay, that's a great question. So when I get that question, what should I say to the student? What's that? Well, no, that's a great question. Why do we do it? Why do we have to do that? I wish that were that easy, but I know in about 15 or 20 minutes, I'll probably get that question. How do we get rid of the parentheses? There's nothing in front of there. What do we distribute? All right. So what about here? How do I get rid of these parentheses? Same thing, right? Is anything going to change? That's not always the case though. Things will change. Zach said, combine like terms. He's right. Combine the, there you go. That's the real part that comes first. They're real. So if they're real, they come first. Imaginary comes second. Eight I. Done. So if I asked you what was the real part, you'd say +5. If I asked you what was the imaginary part, you'd say 8I, right? That's it. Yep, that was it. That's our answer. As long as at the end, if you can tell me what the real part is and what the imaginary part is, you're done. Okay. So what do you think we're going to do for letter B?
Same thing, but you're going to come out negative.
So I got to distribute the negative. So when I distribute the negative, it's not going to be the same, right? So when we distribute the negative here, I'm going to get -4 and -5I. The 7I doesn't get distributed, it just stays. Okay. Combine like terms. Real part comes first. There's only one real number, that's -4, so that comes first. The next one is the imaginary part. Well, I got two imaginary parts. 7 and a -5I. 7I and a -5I. If I combine those, I get +2Is. Done. Okay. All right, look at letter C. What do you think we're going to do for letter C? Distribute, right? The exact same thing we did for number 1. The exact same thing we did for number 1. The only difference is it's a negative. The second one is a negative. You're going to distribute. So the first one, you're not going to change the parentheses. Or you're not going to change, sorry, it's not going to change what's in the parentheses. The second one, though, it will. It's going to be +2, +9I. Reals. Imaginaries. Done. Okay, so that's addition and subtraction. So if you look at the next one at the top of the next page, that isn't multiplication. What's in between? There's nothing in between here, right? There's no negative in between, right? So that means multiplication. Okay. So how do we do multiplication? Well, I'm going to show you how I do multiplication, because multiplication can kind of get crazy sometimes. But if you keep it simple, it's probably going to stay easy. Keep it simple. Okay. So we have a 3 + 1I. I don't have anything. Why do I know this is multiplication? Because I don't have anything in here, right? If I had something in here, if I had a plus or if I had a minus, I would do the same thing I did for number 1 and number 2 and number 3, or sorry, A, B, and C. But I don't. So what I'm doing here is I'm multiplying this guy times this guy, right? Well, it's a binomial. Binomial means it's got 2 parts. It's got 2 parts. That one has 2 parts, and this one has 2 parts, 2 terms. So to multiply, what I do is I make a multiplication table. Looks like a window. Why does it have 2 by 2? Why is it a 2 by 2 window? Because there's 2 parts to each of them, right? So on the top is going to go one of them. It doesn't matter which one. I'm going to put 3 + I here. And on the side, it's going to be 1 + 2I here. Okay. And it's a multiplication table, right? It looks like the multiplication tables you guys have done since 3rd grade, where you're like, this times this makes this, right? And this times this makes this, right? It's multiplication. It's a multiplication table. So 3 times 1 makes a 3. So 3 goes in there. And then I times 1 makes what? 1i or just I, right? You can put a 1i if you want. You can just put a regular I if you want. It's the same thing, right? Over here, a 3 times a positive 2i makes a 6i. Good. And then the last one, I times 2i makes a 2i squared. Yeah, if I have I times I, that's going to be squared. Multiplication is done. Now combine like terms. This guy right here and this guy right here are like terms. They both have regular i's. So if I add them together, because they're both positive, right? What do I get? 7i. These guys over here are not like terms, so I can't combine them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write them. So I'm going to write, it's a positive 3 and a positive 2i squared. Okay, so now, this is where it changes a little bit. Does this answer right here look like that right there? Or that right there? Why not? There's a squared part, right? And there is no squared part here or squared part here, right? So I have to get rid of the squared part. Put on your thinking caps. How am I going to get rid of the squared part? I can put it like I times I. Think about what we've done before. No, not divide.
So, yeah, I times I, then, and that would result in -1.
Go back, yep. Go back to your charts. Don't we know what I squared is? What is it, Bennett? What is I squared?
That would take -1.
Don't, yeah, we knew that, right? From the table. If we didn't know it, it's written down on the table. We said I squared is the same thing as -1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some substitution. Substitution means I take this out and I put something in its place, which is the same value. So watch what I do. I'm going to rewrite everything except this I squared here. I'm going to leave the 2, but I'm going to put parentheses. And instead of I squared, what am I going to put in there? A -1. Because I squared and -1 are the same thing. Why? How do we know that? Our table says that, all right? Our table over here says that this is the same thing as this. So it's not like I'm doing anything wrong. I'm just substituting. So now, isn't this just a multiplication problem here? So when I multiply that, that makes -2. 7i stays 7i. +3 stays +3. And now look what I have. Don't I have some like terms now? Reals come first. So 3 minus 2 is +1. Imaginary comes next. That's +7i. There you go. So why, big question I get is, why did you change that -1? Why did you, where did the I square go? How come I put -1 there? Why did I put -1 there? Because they equal each other, right? They equal each other. It's like a $20 bill and two $10 bills. If you have a $20 bill and I take it and I give you two 10s, it's the same thing, right? It's substitution. You might not want two 10s, but it's the same thing. I didn't take any money from you, right? I just substituted it in, right? It's the same thing, okay? So anytime we see I squareds, that's what we're gonna do. We don't want I squareds, okay? We don't want I squareds at the end of our problem to solve, okay? All right, so let's try the next one. Letter E. All right. It's multiplication, right? It's multiplication because I see this right here and I see there's nothing in here. So it's not going to be like A, B, or C. It's going to be like the one we just did, right? But before I do my window panel, my window pane panel, what do I got to do first? Yep, just by the first ones. Distribute this guy, so I get negative 42 plus 36i. The second one stays because I didn't distribute there. Now finish the rest. Okay, so when I set up my multiplication, one of the squares inside the big square has a 168. One of them has a negative 144i. One of them has a negative 84i, and the last one has a 72i squared. So the first thing I'm going to do is look for common, or not common denominators. I'm going to look for like terms. Like terms. Okay, those two are like terms. So to put them together, what am I going to do? Add them up. They're going to become a bigger negative, right? So when I add up negative 144, or subtract, I should say, you're really adding because they're just becoming a bigger negative. You get minus 228i, or negative 228i. Okay. So now I have 168 real number. I have 72i squared. I don't want I squareds, right? There you go. 72 times, what did I multiply by last time? Negative 1. So when I multiply 72 times negative 1, what do I get? I just get a negative 72, right? Now I can combine these guys here. So one of them is a positive, one of them is a negative, so I'm gonna subtract them. And I get positive 96. That's real, so that goes in front. Done. So the only time I need to substitute -1 in is if I have an I squared. If I don't have an I squared, like the first 3 problems, we didn't have any I squares, right? There were none. So we didn't need to do that. But if you multiply I times I, you're going to get I squared. All right. Okay, so the last one. What does anything squared, what does that mean? Times itself. Times itself, right? So instead of this, I'm going to write it like this. Same thing, I just writing it differently because it makes a little more sense to me that way. Okay, finish the rest.
Why do we multiply 72 by -1?
Because if I didn't, I would have had an I squared. And for it to be in this form here, I can't have any I squareds. Yep. Anytime you have an I squared, always do that. So this one, I see that I have another I squared. I don't want an I squared. I need to change it. So I need to change it like I did the last two. So to change it, I'm going to replace it with a -1 instead. So instead of 4 times I squared, it's 4 times -1. -1 is the same thing, or 4 times -1 is -4. Here's my like term here. Here's my like term here. Combine those together, I get positive 140. That's the real part there. Okay. All righty. Okay, so I'm going to pass around some tape right now. You're going to tape it in. Since we have some extra time, since we started the lesson yesterday, so we have some time, so I want you to get started on your assignment. It's posted, let me see, make sure it's posted. It's posted on Google Classroom. It's going to be on Delta Math. So let me make sure it's posted there. Okay, now it's posted there. Okay, so I want you guys to work on that. If you work well, it won't be due today. It'll be due tomorrow. If not, I'll make it due today. Okay, same as always. All right. So tape in your notes, and then you can, you can open up your Chromebook back again to start on the assignment. Okay.